Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. It's 3 Eastern. We're going to start on time. President Biden, as we talk here live, is about to speak in Wisconsin, and obviously great interest in that and in his interview with George Stephanopoulos. What I'm reporting now is, despite the widespread view that I had and others, that President Biden was never going to leave the race, and that at a minimum he had bought himself time through this interview. What I'm now reporting is that senior people on his campaign and senior people on Capitol Hill no longer believe it's tenable for the president to continue. Their belief is based on a variety of things, which I'm going to tick through. But it's quite a change from my view and my sources' view from 48 hours ago, when many people thought that I trusted that he would be able to power through this. The reasons, as I say, for the change vary from person to person. But whether it's a senior person in the Biden world, either a campaign staffer or a friend of President Biden's, or it's a senior leader on Capitol Hill, the universe of things they're keying off of is pretty similar. And again, I'm going to run through them and not attribute them to any particular individual, but just know that it applies to many people who are supportive of Joe Biden personally, who think what's happening is tragic, who aren't crazy about the alternatives to Joe Biden being the nominee. But again, what unites them is the belief that it's untenable that he goes forward. They all believe he's not there yet. They all believe it's going to take some time for him to get there. We'll talk about that. But let me run through the reasons. First of all, the bad press over the last few days could have been worse had his campaign team not done a lot of handholding. But the bad press generated by the president himself has really freaked out these people. And they don't think it's going to end. Remember, the premise of this campaign was whichever candidate was in the news more was going to lose between Trump and Biden. And these people, my sources say, when's Joe Biden going to get out of the news? This goes on forever. And Donald Trump could probably shoot 50 people on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't be the lead story. Number two, there are going to be a lot more stories about the president's mental health. You've already seen now some revisionism from my colleagues saying, well, this has been happening for months and months, and we knew all along. People are very worried about those stories and about the secondary story about who knew what when and about the cover-up of it, because there was a cover-up. So these people say that will never end, and that will drive a lot of the coverage, as will President Biden, who drove coverage in the last few days saying he was telling the governors he'd go to sleep at 8 o'clock, stop doing events after 8 o'clock, to rest more. The Biden operation has gone from one that was pretty efficient, didn't leak, didn't backbite, to a totally different realm amongst the campaign staff, but also amongst the governors. The leaks out of that governor's meeting, not the kind of thing you've normally seen in the Biden era, and that people believe that would never end as well. And that the president, one of the things he has to do, it was thought that he had to do, was to reach out to people. But the problem is he then reaches out and it all leaks out and puts him in an unflattering light. They don't see him making urgent changes. They see the culture of the campaign changing in negative ways. He's cutting out his advisors. Some of his senior people, some of his best friends who have been his political colleagues for years are not being consulted. I'm told that Hunter was basically the one preparing him for the ABC interview, not his communications or political staff. That has, of course, caused a lot of tension within his team. And of course, uncharacteristic for Joe Biden, he's big on privately blaming the staff when things go wrong, but the public blaming of the staff for the debate prep has also shattered the culture of the campaign. They want to see him do more, and they think what he's already failed, going to Delaware after he goes to Wisconsin to hang out in Delaware for a day and a half. They don't like that. Announcing that they're going to be events in the battleground states rather than doing them beyond the 2 he's got scheduled, or at least putting specifics on them. Very much troubling to people. They'd like to see him shake up the campaign, bring in Rahm Emanuel from Japan, bring in Michael Hooley, bring in David Plouffe, do something. None of that. They look at how he's dealing with this crisis as passive, and they look at it as indicative of his inability to do more, and that reinforces their belief that, in fact, he's had a severe cognitive decline. The radio interview and the event he did yesterday, he did 2 local radio interviews and the 4th of July event. Those did not reassure people. They weren't a disaster, but again, they did not see in those the the indications that he's fighting hard enough or that he's got the capacity to focus to undo the damage done by the debates. The governors were supportive to an extent with their public statements, but as we talked about, they leaked. And a lot of the governors left the meeting unsettled. Fundraising. You've all seen the stories about major donors and Hollywood donors and business donors saying, we're not giving to this campaign anymore until Biden, we're not going to give anything until Biden quits. The small dollar donations, I'm told, were also going dry after doing very well immediately after the debate. But again, they believe the president will find it untenable to go forward without small dollars or large dollars. The most important factor in the belief of the people on the Hill and at the White House is the Congress. Chuck Schumer, I'm told, has believed for quite some time that this is untenable and has started to make that clear to people. Hakeem Jeffries has done what everyone described to me, including people on Schumer's team, as a masterful job of keeping House Republicans en masse from coming forward. But given the unhappiness that exists on the text change and other communication that members have been doing, they believe that when Congress gets back next week, that again, it will be untenable for the president to continue in the face of a lot of questions that will extend beyond he shouldn't be the nominee to, again, how did this happen? Schumer and Jeffries don't believe they can hold the flood back. And they believe, and the strategists believe, for the House and Senate on the Democratic side, I'm told, that while Kamala Harris, who we'll get to in a moment, is not a perfect candidate and that there's a lot of questions about her, but they believe she'll at least bring some energy to this, a turn of the page. She's not going to put any red states in play. She'll gain some votes that Joe Biden wasn't getting. She'll lose some white men and other groups that he was getting. But they believe that if she does a good job, a decent job, that if she picks a good running mate, and if she runs a good race, a lot of ifs, that she could do better than Joe Biden and that she won't hurt them as much, that the negatives that she brings will not hurt their Senate and House candidates as much. And as you all know, that's what they're more concerned about. They don't think Joe Biden is going to win the White House. Most of them didn't think he was before. They want to do everything they can to try to win as much of the House and Senate races as they can, and maybe even win a majority back in the House, maybe hold the Senate under some circumstances. They would prefer, I'm told, her dysfunction to his, because they think hers has at least some upside and they don't see any for him. Timing, I have no idea, and my sources don't either. They all emphasize that Joe Biden is going to need time to figure this out for himself. None of them are inclined to pressure him publicly. They'd like to see this happen organically. They'll go there if they need to, I believe, based on the body language. No one threatened that to me. But they think it will happen. Is that 2 weeks, a week, 5 days? I don't know. Will Kamala Harris be the designated nominee? I believe she will, for three main reasons. Number one, it'll be very difficult in this party to bypass her, and she wants it, so she wouldn't step aside. Number two, no one has emerged really as a consensus obvious other choice. And I'm told that most of them are not interested in trying to raise money, build a campaign, and withstand the assault of Donald Trump. So I'm not sure if Harris stepped aside that you'd have as many takers as people think. But the notion of challenging her for it, I'm told, given that most of them aren't interested in it, I think she'll largely be unopposed. And finally, it's just the easiest thing. She gets the money. Most campaign finance lawyers think she can keep the money. Other people wouldn't be able to keep the money. A lot of the Biden people who don't particularly have a good relationship with her are thinking seriously about if she asked them to stay on, would they? So she probably will inherit at least some staff. Who would her running mate be? I've heard a lot of people with a lot of speculation. There's some people who think Shapiro is the obvious choice. There are other people think Shapiro would be a disaster, that a Black woman and a Jew are a little bridge too far. The best thing I've heard, and again, I've known nothing from her team because they're not playing on these questions about who she'd actually consider or pick. But the best thing I've heard so far, to my sensibility, is Governor Whitmer. Just say two women on the ticket and just see if Donald Trump can withstand running against two women. Lastly, everybody asks, will he continue as president? It is the conventional wisdom amongst Republicans and the media that it's impossible for him to stay on as president. I'd strongly assume he's going to stay on for a couple of reasons. One is it'd be way too abrupt for him to leave, and he thinks he can do the job just fine. In addition, the notion that Kamala Harris, whose greatest weakness, if she embarks on this, is her ability to manage people and get along with people who work with her and for her. The notion that she could be president, commander in chief, and presidential candidate against Donald Trump is far-fetched to me. It seems setting her up for failure. So my expectation is if he does decide to withdraw as the nominee, he will stay on as president. But I could be wrong, because I was definitely wrong about whether he'd step down. And again, he hasn't decided to. But based on what his senior team, members of his senior team think, and based on what I'm hearing from Capitol Hill, the expectation is widely held that he will, before too much longer, reach that conclusion, regardless of how he does at this event in Wisconsin that's about to begin, regardless of how he does in the Stephanopoulos interview. There are some great people on this call who I'd like to hear from, and I may call on. But I want to start by just taking questions, which I may kick to others. But if you've got a question, please raise your hand and we'll get you right in. That is the purpose of two-way. Rather than sitting and watching cable and scrolling on social, you can actually be part of the conversation. Charles, unmute, please, and ask your question or make your comment.
Hey, Mark. What role does the family have to play? I mean, we just heard that the family's staunchly behind them. How's that factoring into this?
I have to be careful about how I say this. Some members of the family agree with my sources that it's untenable to go forward. But I believe Hunter and Jill are where the president is, which is they still plan to fight for this. And I'm a little bit confused by people who are confused by that. Bill Clinton didn't give up the nomination when people told him he couldn't win. Donald Trump didn't. And this guy put his hat in the arena. He ran for it. He won all the primaries and caucuses, won almost all the delegates. And he's not inclined to give that up lightly. And the family's supporting him. As far as I know, they're currently supporting him. As I said, I'm told Hunter prepped him for the interview. But the assumption is that whether they lead him to the conclusion or he leads them to the conclusion, that the family will be on board. My sources believe the family is not going to stop the inexorable from happening.
And if you had Kamala go through the rigmarole of a contested convention, you don't think that'll cleanse her candidacy?
There's no time for cleansing. And again, I don't think anybody wants to run against her. From my soundings with people, there's not one person who wants to run against her if she goes for it. And I think my guess is, again, no one has said this because people aren't there, but my guess is Obama, Clinton, and Biden will all endorse her. The groups who have endorsed the campaign will all endorse her. I think it'll be, if you think about, what would, and the delegates, remember, the delegates are not random Democrats. They're Biden-Harris delegates. So I don't see the path to somebody stepping in here and taking it from her. Would that be better for her or worse? I think it would be worse. Most of my sources think it would be worse. They're like, we got to get this underway. But I don't think we'll ever know because I think she'll just be the nominee. Michael Graham.
So two quick things. One, I'm in New Hampshire at a cigar bar, by the way, the only place to do these great events. And I'm
the
wondering,
battleground state of New Hampshire.
Well, and that's new. That's what I was going to ask you is what are the states where the shift, has an impact on whether it's the Virginias, the Minnesotas, et cetera. And then also the second question is, what about waiting until January 21st and that fake or whatever, the legal primary, having him be the nominee, then step down? Isn't it easier to fill a vacancy than it is to have a wide open convention where Free Palestine and AOC people can cause trouble?
It is, but this is not, according to my sources, this would not be a wide open convention. As I just said, this would be a convention where one person's name is put into nomination. There's no one out there amongst the people who get mentioned, Newsom, Shapiro, Whitmer. There's no one I know from my reporting, and no one anyone's heard of, who's going to challenge the incumbent Black female vice president with the endorsement of the incumbent president and probably Obama and the Clintons at the convention for delegates who are pledged to Obama, to Biden Harris. It's just not going to happen, I believe, if this plays out this way. Look, back of the envelope, she's stronger with some groups than Biden. She's weaker with others. I suspect there's some older white men in Manchester who might have voted for Biden who now either won't vote or might vote for Kennedy or might vote for Trump. I think it's probably a wash, but I'll tell you, as I said to some of you yesterday, don't underestimate the ferocity with which she will be that the Republicans will attempt to define her. She is a stronger person and a stronger politician than the popular image is, but it is no joke about how poorly she does under pressure and how poor a manager she is. And the Republicans aren't going to wait and give her a gentleman's head start here. They're going to go right after her right away. And they got a lot to work with. And I'll say again, if you think we know everything there is to know negative about the incumbent vice president of the United States, you are wrong. There's going to be new stuff about her, some that's new, some that's new to people. How many people on this call know that she apparently flew on Donald Trump's plane with Willie Brown once? Anybody raise your hand if you knew that? That apparently happened. That's kind of interesting, not necessarily damaging, but I'm just telling you, she's gonna face an onslaught if she's a nominee, and how that will play in the states. She doesn't put any states in play that aren't in play now. I can't tell you a state where I think she's stronger macro than Biden is. She might end up being stronger than Biden is in some of these states, but I can't tell you one today. There's nothing obvious. And there's two real questions. One, Tom Rogers raised yesterday, which I've seen now others raise. Tom was the first one I heard raise it, which is, what did she know and when did she know it? She's been a public defender of Joe Biden's acuity, but did she have data on that? As I've said, you didn't really need any private data to know that he had an acuity issue for a long time. But how's she going to answer that? And then again, unlike every other possible replacement, she's got the Biden-Harris record to defend. And there's not a lot of indication that she was an internal dissenter on the inflation policies, on the immigration policies, on the other issues. So she's going to have her work cut out for her. But I will tell you, again, from having talked to people intensely about this today, because up until today, I didn't think much about Biden's chances of dropping out. You can't rule out that she'd be a stronger candidate than Biden, but you can't say it's emphatically true. You can't rule out that she could beat Donald Trump, but you certainly would struggle to put together 270 electoral votes right now for her. Thank you, Mr. Graham. Tom Roper, unmute, please.
Hi, Mark. This story really hits home for me because we have a elderly person in my family who's going through the same thing. It's a very human story for me and my family. And there's a person in my family whose boss came to them a couple of years ago. They had worked for a very long time. They were very close to this person. They said, well, we don't think you can do this job anymore. She hasn't spoke to the person since. And the family, of course, is there to support her, which is what they need to do. So I think those people who are waiting for Jill or Hunter to say something, they're going to wait a long time. My question is, who do you think is the person who's going to blow up their relationship with Joe Biden in order to kind of break the dam, as it were?
I think the senior staff will, based on my reporting. I think some members of the senior staff will. I think that Joe Biden's going to have to reach the conclusion himself. I think he's probably, just based on my limited understanding of the family, I think he's going to reach that conclusion before Hunter and before Jill. But I think he appreciates elected officials and what elected officials face. And I can tell you that House and Senate Democratic strategists on the campaign committees strongly believe at this point that they're better off running with Kamala Harris than they are running with him. And I think he'll get that. I think he'll get that. And so how that's conveyed to him, I don't know. I know that the congressional leaders, as I've said, believe if you give him enough space, he'll figure it out. You know, if the fundraising is as dire as some are telling me it is, both small dollars and large, then that may be it, because they'll tell him, here's how much we have coming in. That may be enough to him to at least begin to consider this. Do not, as I tried to say at the beginning, not all of you were on, do not assume this is happening tomorrow. Do not assume it's happening Monday. But my sources believe it's inexorable. It will happen. Russ Rogers.
Thanks, Mark. Just as a comment, I was willing to give him a chance at redemption after just a horrible performance, probably the worst I've seen, and I've watched every debate since Nixon. But when your answer is, I'll take more naps, that's not exactly what I'd call a reassuring thing,
Yeah.
right?
Russ, who did you vote for in 20?
Biden.
Who'd
And
you
I'll
vote
be
for?
honest with
Who'd you vote for in 16?
Clinton.
Okay, and who are you going to vote for now?
That's going to be the question of who shows up against the evil Cheeto. The problem that I have is I don't like Harris, and there's a lot of reasons why I don't. And I am a small donor to Biden. So
Where do you live, Russ?
Missouri. So I'm a throwaway vote one way or the other because Missouri's so red it's not even close. But the reality is I won't give any more money to the campaign if it's under Biden. Because I think it's good money after bad. I'd rather support a down ballot with a $46 donation.
Yeah.
The tenor of the text messages and the tenor of the emails is just desperate at this point. But away from fundraising and back to Harris, I think you made a really good point that not everybody knows everything about Harris. If you look at her time as Attorney General of California, it was not exactly what you would call a liberal paradise.
Trump
right?
will run to her left on that.
But
She's the
she
nominee.
does have the benefit of, if it's her, she's got $250 million in the bank, right? So, and nobody else can say that because as I understand it, they won't get the money if it's not either Harris or Biden.
Yeah.
So, that's going to be my question. And my question for you is, will she be able, has she grown enough of as a politician to zero out what she's done in her past career and the last race that she ran?
Well, she's had every opportunity. Joe Biden has told his staff from the beginning to give her every opportunity. She's had, I think, a record number of meetings with world leaders in Washington and around the world. She's been invited to lots of meetings. She's been, helped with manage her staff. Again, she's not as bad as the Republicans and the press say she is, but she is not good under pressure, and she is not good managing people, and she's not good when she's criticized. And I can tell you, if she's the nominee, all three of those things will be implicated pretty quickly. John Sununu, I'd love for you to appraise Kamala Harris's strengths and weaknesses if she's the nominee.
Okay, I think you've assessed them pretty well. You talked about the amount that that's publicly known about her, but nobody really knows or no voters know, and the amount of information that really isn't known at all that will come out. The observation I made before in a recent conversation with you was that the damage isn't that she flew on Trump's plane with Willie Brown. The damage is that she'll have to explain it for 3 days, and that will prevent 3 days of driving the messages that she and her team wants to drive on abortion or the Supreme Court, or that they've really got inflation under control, whatever it is. And so there will be a large number, who knows how many, but of distractions like that, each eating up days, maybe not a week in and of itself, but each eating up 3 or 4 days of campaigning. And to me, that's the biggest single challenge that she'll face, beyond the demographics, beyond whether she appeals to older voters, younger voters, white voters, or Hispanic voters. And I think Trump already has a fair amount of momentum in those constituencies. Choosing the right vice presidential candidate will matter for her. You had Karl Rove on, who talked in good depth about the importance of choosing a vice presidential candidate that's perceived as being up for the job of president. And the reason that's important is because it's a proxy for the presidential candidate's judgment. And that's always, important, but it's going to be especially important here because it will be the first thing that Kamala Harris has ever done on the national stage to convey the kind of judgment she would have or might have as chief executive. The only other comments I would add, one, I think this is going to happen faster than most people think. I think this is done by the end of next week. Two, partly in answer to the question that was made, the people, and you hinted at this, it's Schumer and Jeffries. They're the ones who absolutely can go to the president and would be willing to deliver the news, even if it's at risk to their relationship with the president, because their position within their caucus and their role as leader of their House and Senate respectively is much more important to them as politicians and Americans, and I think is in a positive way. So I think they're willing. Those are examples of people who are absolutely willing to burn the bridge to do what they think is the right thing, and I think they will do that next week. And lastly, the reason, a year ago I said it's more likely than not that he wouldn't be the nominee. That was a pretty extreme thing to say at the time. It's obviously turned out to be the case. The reason he's absolutely failed to be able to recover from the debate is because almost everything that they have done to try to recover has actually hurt them. It's not that it hasn't helped them. His interview in Wisconsin hurt him. His radio interview in Pennsylvania hurt him. His performance at the 4th of July yesterday hurt him. His saying, I want to go to bed at 8 o'clock, like won't do events after 8 o'clock, hurt him. In trying to stem this, they've actually compounded the damage. And finally, it will only get worse, right? The Joe Biden we see today, if he continued, wouldn't be the Joe Biden we would have on election day. Okay? His faculties are continuing to decline. It's been obvious. You only need to look at him 6 months ago and 6 months before that. And you've talked about this many times on these calls, and obviously you've been right. So that's why it will happen quickly. I think by Friday he's out. I think you're right, they'll go to a convention. This will be a contested convention, but there won't be any contestants, as exactly as you point out. But I think that's good. It will be an open public convention where the delegates have the option to vote for someone else, but they will vote for Harris. And if I were a Democrat, I would want that process. I'd want it to be transparent. I'd want it to be open. It might not even be a bad thing if someone throws out another name or two that Harris then defeats resoundingly at the convention. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. The official slogan of New Hampshire is live free or die. The unofficial slogan is Sununus, never in doubt, almost always right. We have two of America's finest pollsters on here, and I'm wondering if I can ask them a question, if they're willing. Whit Ayers and Ann Seltzer. I don't know if you two would be willing to unmute. I'd love to ask you a question if you would. Get a little bit ahead of ourselves and ask about something that's never happened in American history, which is an all-female ticket. If it were Harris and Whitmer, is there anything you can say about voter attitude towards voting for women? Would that be daunting, unknown, or not positive? Whit, what do you think of the prospect of that?
Mark, I think it would be overwhelmed by the unpopularity of Kamala Harris. Her ratings are lower than Joe Biden's right now. She has an incredibly difficult time stringing together 3 coherent sentences. I still remember when she was trying to explain her own healthcare plan back in 2020. And I kept thinking, listen, just get Pete Buttigieg to explain your plan, and then he could explain it in comparison with his plan, and I understand what she's talking about. It will very quickly become evident that this woman is a very, very poor candidate for president of the United States. And the question is whether they're going to ride that all the way through to November or not. But I'm telling you, it has a very difficult time being coherent and being persuasive. And I can't believe that the Democrats would just meekly ride her all the way to the convention any more than I can believe that they to the election any more than I believe they're going to ride Joe Biden all the way to the election. But we'll see. Y'all may be right, but I'm telling you, her liabilities are going to become so evident so quickly that it's going to be a problem.
Whit, I appreciate all that. I'll ask you again, though, if you'd weigh in on the question, would a ticket with 2 women, is there something to that, do you think, that might capture the imagination of swing voters?
It depends on who the 2 women are. You know, if it were
Kamala Harris and Gretchen Whitmer.
I just have so little confidence in Kamala Harris's ability. If it were Amy Klobuchar and Gretchen Whitmer, it would be completely different. But I just think Kamala Harris has huge liabilities as a candidate.
All right, Joe Biden's coming up. We may end this, even though there are hands raised to watch him. And I'm going to ask the producers if it's possible that we can watch it together. Can you see if you can put the TV with the audio in the screen? If that's possible, I'd like you to do that. Ann, did you unmute? Ann
I did
Seltzer?
unmute.
Okay. I'd love for you to weigh in.
Well, I'm going to say boldly, I have no answers at this point. I think people overestimate how quickly public opinion gels. In my experience, it takes a while. So I don't think we have much data to look at under these circumstances. I am reminded of Hillary Clinton's run in 2016. And I remember famously, much quoted, saying, her negatives are just so negative. And so it was the intensity of her negatives that was a block to her ability to succeed as a campaigner, I think. But she's facing a candidate, would be potentially, whose negatives are so very negative. So the whole ability to look at candidate popularity and feel as though you've got a roadmap forward, these are unanticipated, maybe anticipated recently, but I don't like to use unprecedented. I need a better word for it. History isn't much guide to us. I'll say it that short.
Okay, Anna, stay with me and just answer the question. In looking at the public polling, the conventional wisdom is that while the bottom hasn't fallen out, that there's consistency over the national polls. Just talk about what you see in terms of, is this the kind of thing that's likely to bounce back to the race being mostly tied nationally, or do you think it's possible that the race is shifted in a more permanent way?
I have no answer for that question. I am cognizant, and I've said this before, that every day there is something that is happening in the political sphere that in other cycles would have been the key defining turn point. But we've seen so many key defining turn points end up having negligible effect. So I'm reluctant to go on the record and say which way I think things are going to go at this very early stage.
Okay, and thank you. All right, I'm listening to Joe Biden with one ear, and I'll keep doing that. Let's take some of your questions. Phil, thank you, Ann, and thank you, Whit. Phil, go ahead, unmute and ask your question, make your comment.
Hello, Mark, good to see you again. It's Phil Singer.
I recognize you, Phil. For those who don't know, Phil Singer is a very successful small businessman in Gotham City who used to work with, amongst others, Hillary Clinton. And he's a big believer in the Democratic Party and no Trump lover, but doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome. Was that all accurate?
I am no Trump lover, and I don't have Trump derangement system. And I have to say that I am somewhat perplexed at the rush to coronate Kamala. I realize the logistics and the logistical challenges in not nominating Kamala, but I think she is as flawed a candidate as any that we've seen. And I think the Democratic Party's fixation on demographics continues to be its downfall. I remember when Hillary announced in 2016 and had her Rainbow Coalition video announcement that she used, which basically had no message and was basically, it was just here's something for every demographic group in the country, and really said nothing. And this fixation on going out and saying, all right, if we put 2 women on the ticket, or this demographic or that demographic, will somehow build out a coalition and win. at the end of the day, the candidates have to be able to perform. This is as much a show business as it is a business of substance. And Kamala has shown time and time again that she is not good in an interview setting, in a debate setting, with the exception of the time she took down Joe Biden in that first debate back in 2020. And Wit hit every point, on the nose. She is not a great candidate, and I think as deranged as Trump can be, he's going to be, very formidable against her. And let's not forget, on immigration, she did not perform great. On voting reform and other issues that she was charged with taking on, she hasn't done great. So I think she's going to have to deal with a lot of issues.
Okay, Phil, stand by. President Biden, some people think he looks fine. Looks a little old to me, but he looks fine. And he says, I'm running again and I'm going to win. He's pretty fired up. So I'm listening with one ear. He's doing just fine so far in Wisconsin. My sources won't care. Phil, I think a lot of people agree with you, including a lot of elected officials, including people who are running. But you know the party well. How do you enact that sensibility? How do you, if she wants it, what do you propose? And again, you can't be something with nothing. Like who do you think you can encourage into the race to go against her?
I think it's challenging, and I think there's going to have to be some sort of meeting of the minds. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, there has to be either a consensus among the 5 or 6 names that most often get dropped, or that get mentioned in the press, to either come to a meeting of the minds as to a process for going about selecting a nominee, or and this is unlikely to happen, but if Biden decides to step aside, I mean, the logical thing for him to do is if he's not up to the job of running for president, I mean, let's be honest, he's probably not up to the job of being president right now, and he should resign the office and let her take it over. I realize nobody who takes the position would ever have the, once you get the job, you don't want to let go of the job, but
yeah.
The honorable thing to do would be to be a bridge to the next office and let, whomever the 5 wannabes are duke it out in a contested convention.
Bill, of the people who might be willing to do it, who do you think would be the strongest candidate, who you'd like to see as the nominee?
I mean, I think the person who would be most interesting would be somebody who's not known. I think an Andy Bashir would be interesting.
Okay. Say Andy Bashir. If Andy Bashir said, Phil, I saw you on Mark Halperin's two-way, and you know what? I want to go for it. What would you tell him? How would that be an achievable mission?
Well, I think he's got to be able to, I think the Democratic Party has to take a ticket from, some of the things that the Republicans have done in the past, where he has to get a pass on some of the more moderate positions he's got and make an electability argument where he's able to.
I'm interrupting you, Phil. Back in the real world, the delegates are
Okay.
liberal. The delegates are Biden-Harris delegates. So
the delegates are
going
Biden-Harris.
Going to the Biden-Harris delegates and saying, vote for me, I'm more moderate because I've got a better chance to win the general. That's what you'd have them say?
Well, I mean, look, we are in a situation where if Trump wins, pretty much the America we know as we know it is gone. So yes, there is I remember when Schumer took over the DSCC in 2006, and the Republicans had just won a slew of Senate seats. Corzine, was the head of the DSCC in the previous cycle. Senate Democrats got wiped out, and they were a few seats away from getting a 60-seat majority. And Schumer took the Senate Democrats in the in one of their retreats, and he said, our backs are up against the wall. If they win a few more seats, they're going to be able to get as many judges as they want in, and America as we know it is done. And this is one of those moments in American history. If the Democrats mess around here and they don't, put winning first above all else, this is it. I mean, this is the moment to be put winning above all else.
Yeah. So, Phil, when I did your resume, I left off something, of course, that you worked for Chuck Schumer.
Yes.
Chuck would obviously, I think, agree with you. I think at least privately, he'd agree with you. So there aren't very many people in the party who could say to Biden, President Biden, look, don't endorse Kamala Harris. Either convince her to stand down or don't endorse anyone, or join me in being for the Bashir Whitmer ticket or whatever it is. What do you think the odds are that Chuck Schumer would choose to play such a role? No
I
further
think
questions, Your Honor. No, go ahead, answer, but
I think the
Yeah.
odds are, I think that's the answer to that question is a function of whether there's a consensus that can be built out to effectuate that kind of an outcome. So if there's backup around that, if a Pelosi and some of the others, work towards that outcome, then yes, there's a potential for that to happen. But I mean, look, I realize that I'm in a little bit of a la la land.
yeah, I mean, again, if someone were out there, like if Pete Buttigieg had finished a really strong second last time, or I don't know, you could imagine that to be somebody out there who was super strong.
Yeah.
Al Gore in 2004, whatever it is. But there's no one like that. The people who are mentioned, and again, most of them think that there would be a suicide mission just running against Trump, let alone trying to step over the party's first black vice president, country's first black vice president, step over her, divide the party, and then try to beat Trump from a standing start in a couple months. I mean, you're a persuasive guy, but I don't know that you could talk anybody into the race to take on that suicide mission.
I would love to see research, and maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I would love to see research that shows just how much of an issue that is among rank and file voters in the Democratic Party.
To take her on, you mean?
About the challenges of taking her on and the dangers of taking her on.
Yeah.
Because I think that's definitely a Washington and Beltway driven narrative, but I'd be curious to see if that's actually something that's a real world concern.
Yep. So Joe Biden just talked about what a great vice president Kamala Harris is, got a big hand. He is fired up and ready to go. He's better than he was in North Carolina, I think, and he was pretty good in North Carolina. And the crowd's really into it. I don't know how much they prep this crowd. They clearly prep the North Carolina crowd, but this crowd's pretty fired up too. I don't think my sources will waver. Phil, anything else you want to say? You're an excellent participant. Anything else you want to say?
No, I'm glad I saw the email and was able to join. I love.
Will you dance with me at Kamala Harris's inauguration ball if there is?
If there's, listen, just to be clear, if she runs, I hope she wins, and I'll pray for her every day.
Okay. Phil, thank you. Come back a lot.
Thank you.
Daniel Kramer, unmute, please.
Hi, you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to be the dissenting view. I disagree with Phil, with Mr. Sununu. I have no political whatsoever experience. I think that Kamala would be a far better candidate than Joe. I think she would rise up to the level that is needed of her. And I think all of the stuff about how she's going to be hit with this issue and that issue and that issue, I think the only thing that's going to matter to the Democratic voters is, can she go on with Joe Biden's programs and not be senile? And I think that the bar is really low. And I think that all she has to do is show that I can carry on with the team's message and I'm not senile. And I don't think any of the issues raised about her by Mr. Sununu or even by you, I don't think will matter to the voters.
What in history makes you think that, Daniel?
Absolutely zero. I think this is a unique time. I think Trump's negatives are astronomical. I don't really care what Kamala's negatives are. I care one negative. Is she senile or not? No. Okay. Can she come up to the level that'll be needed for her to be a candidate? I believe she can.
Okay. I'm continuing to get emails confirming my impression from watching with one ear and eye that President Biden's doing quite well in this event.
I want to ask you one question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you run a vote right here? Who here thinks that Joe Biden will win if he stays in the race? Can you do a vote of the people that are on the call?
We could.
Want to ask?
Just will Joe Biden win if he runs?
If he stays in the race,
yeah.
Will Joe Biden win?
Yeah. Raise your hand if you think if Joe Biden stays in, he'll win. Raise your hand. Okay, there's a few.
Is it a majority? You have 300 people on the call.
No, it's not a majority.
What is
Definitely not a majority. Just a few.
A few. So therefore, that answers my question. He is going to stay in the race, if he does, knowing that probably he's going to lose. I don't really care what he thinks, but the voters know that he's going to lose. So Kamala is a better choice than what you got.
Okay, I'm going to read you the lead of a Washington Post story that ran moments ago. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia is attempting to assemble a group of Democratic senators to ask Joe Biden to exit the presidential race. Warner is telling Democratic senators that Biden can no longer remain in the election in the wake of his faltering debate performance. His spokesperson would neither confirm or deny that the senator thinks Biden needs to drop out. And I love this statement they put out. I wouldn't even call this a non-denial denial. Here's a statement. Like many other people in Washington across the country, Senator Warner believes these are critical days for the president's campaign, and he has made that clear to the White House. All right. Daniel, I totally appreciate your point of view. And as I said, I think she might be a stronger candidate than Joe Biden, but she might not. And I also think it's possible she'll lose on a landslide. And I'm telling you to watch her ability to manage this under pressure. She just doesn't have a great track record of managing well or responding well to pressure. And what she's going to be asked to do is significantly harder than anything she's ever been asked to do. And I'll say again, I've known her a long time. I have great appreciation for her, and it saddens me how she's been caricatured, and she's a stronger person than she's portrayed publicly and by the Republican Party, but she's got a lot of flaws, and they will not necessarily allow her to do this, I think, particularly well. Cynthia, please unmute. Question or comment? Cynthia, can you unmute? All right. Cynthia, we'll come back to you perhaps. Let's go to Jason. Jason, unmute, please.
Thanks so much, Mark. So my question is, you say the conventional wisdom is that she doesn't put any new states in play. Is the conventional wisdom still that choosing a vice president from a Rust Belt state might help with the math a little bit more, or does she make more play for the Sun Belt or Georgia and North Carolina, given the demographics that she might appeal to?
Right. So it's interesting because you look at the data, it's again back of the envelope, and it's going to be in a different context. But currently, she does better with the Obama coalition than Biden does. She does worse with where Biden is currently staying in the race, which is with older voters, older white voters, and older voters. If the more diverse states are in the Sun Belt, but those also are states where the Democrats are currently farther behind, in part because of Biden, but in part because of the Biden record, which she'll have to, own to some extent. I think we'll have to see. My guess is she's going to, if she is a nominee, her most likely path to 270 is going to be the one path Biden had, which is the Great Lakes states and Nebraska. Normally, I'm a believer that the only thing a running mate does is validate the judgment of the top of the ticket. In this case, I think there are two potential vice presidential nominees if Kamala Harris is the nominee from those states, Governor of Pennsylvania, the Governor of Michigan, that possibly could actually, for once, break history and actually help you win a state. They're very relatively popular in their states, but I don't think either of them would think it would be guaranteed to win. So what electoral college options there are for a Kamala Harris as compared to a Joe Biden, I don't think they're very different. In terms of the states that are in play, I think the states where Joe Biden has been threatened of late, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Virginia, maybe New Mexico, maybe New Jersey, I don't know that Harris is stronger in those states. So I don't know that she shoves those back firmly in the blue column. We're going to have to see what people think of her in the context of a presidential. And just to be clear, the range of my view of what she could be like is wide. I could see Whit Ayers being 100% right, like Sununu level right, totally right, that she's a disaster. And I could see Daniel being right, that in fact, she's not senile and she can talk about the abortion and Medicare and tax cuts for the wealthy. Biden's done speaking. He's shaking hands, looks great. I could see either. And I'm normally pretty opinionated. I just don't have a view about this. I'll tell you though, my suspicion, if you ask me to pick, is that Whit's more likely to be right. Because I've seen what she's like under pressure. We all saw what she's like under pressure when she ran for president. The Medicare thing that Whit cited, if you want to get a sense of how Kamala Harris deals with the pressure of a national campaign, go watch how she handled Medicare for all. And it's a textbook case of someone completely unready for the pressure of a national campaign. Now, since then, she's met with world leaders. She's been vice president. She's certainly had opportunities to get better. But if I asked you 2 months ago, not you, if I asked senior Biden officials who spend a lot of time with her, is Kamala Harris ready to either beat Donald Trump or be president? They would have told you no. They're singing a different tune today for a variety of reasons, but they would have told you no, and they spent a lot of time with her. Thank you for the question. Mark Katz.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Let me start with a short preamble. I watch a lot of Yankee games with my son, and when the Yankees are down by a lot in the late innings, I will turn to him and say, it's not too late for this game to wind up on Yankees Classics, which is where they replay all the games where the Yankees win. So I think about this race, about what has to happen now for Biden to win. And in the last calls that I've watched with you, and I really enjoy your two ways and your content, Mark. The things I've responded to most strongly was the other night when you said, posited the idea of a Whitmer and Shapiro ticket, kind of a very tactical idea where the Democrats would shore up Pennsylvania and Michigan and run that. And then in this call, the thing that you said that got my most attention, you followed up with our two great pollsters, is the all-female ticket, which also is a big idea and potentially a game-changing idea for me. And I think, our politics is fundamentally broken, and you can easily make the, my wife makes the case that we suffer from kind of testosterone poisoning in our national politics. And the idea of women running the country is a compelling and overdue idea. And I wonder if that idea can be elevated and transform the framework of the election of what kind of politics do we want that could overcome who exactly is on the ticket. And I hear everything people are saying about Kamala Harris. I think you can make the case that Kamala Harris is the most plausible candidate, with the exception of all the others. Or wait, no, that's backwards. But in any event, she's problematic, but it's not impossible she could win. But I guess what I'm asking is the idea of two women on the ticket a big enough idea to kind of change the framework of the question of our national conversation?
Right. Mark, you joined late, correct?
No, I did not. I heard.
I asked Whit and Ann both that question.
I know that. I heard their answer.
Okay. All right.
I did.
I mean, to me, if you ask me, based on the people I talked to today, if Kamala Harris is the nominee, to me, that's the best idea I've heard. That's the best idea I've heard. Even though I think, based on the way Gretchen Whitmer handled controversies during COVID, I'm not sure how she'd be under pressure. And certainly, she's completely unscrutinized by the national press, completely. So it's a roll of the dice. But I think I share your view that if you're looking for something to shake this up and to potentially get voters to think anew and to really press the issue of reproductive freedom, obviously front and center, to me, and it may be the best they have to offer.
Like I said, that was just the strongest idea that I've heard in this conversation, and I wanted to share that with others.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Someone messaged me and asked me to call on a woman, and I would if one had their hand up. So don't blame me for who's getting called on. I only can call on people with their hands up. So if you're a woman and you've got a question, please raise your hand. I'd happily call on you. Cynthia, raise your hand again. Cynthia, unmute. Go ahead.
Yes, I believe with everything I've read and reporting, a lot of large donors, i.e. the Disney woman, et cetera, has said not only will they not give money to Biden, no one else in the Democrat side. So doesn't that mean that Biden has to drop out, if that is true?
If what is true?
If donors have said not only will they not give money to Biden if he stays in the race, but they won't give money to any Democrat running.
Right. So, I mean, certainly that's a threat intended to force him out. But he's got some money in the bank. And if it's clear he's not getting out and he gets nominated and we get to September, if he's way behind, yeah, he's going to have trouble raising money. But I think people will start giving him money again if he's the only chance to beat Donald Trump. So in addition, he spent over $100 million on ads and hasn't really seemed to have affected the race. So I don't think you can force him out just on that. I think that I continue to believe that the Congress telling him he has to go is what's going to do it. But it's not nothing. But I don't think that's dispositive by itself. Thank you for the question, Cynthia. I'm getting a lot of texts and a lot of messages. Is J. Mark Powell? J. Mark Powell, are you on here? I'd like to call on you if you've got something to say, but I don't see you on my screen. Do you have your hand up? No. All right. Let's go to Bill. Bill, unmute, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, just two quick questions. Well, first, any chatter about, now I already put these into the chat, about Jared Polis of Colorado. And by the way, someone said something about gay being a factor against Buttigieg or whoever. It's 2024. I don't think that's a factor at all. But the more important question, what about Kennedy? And we have a couple of pollsters here. Has there been really any question how these new circumstances affect Kennedy or how Kennedy affects, I mean, he's really the only third party candidate has anything remotely near a shot. And yes, we know that's a debatable point, but yeah, where's Kennedy fit into this?
Yeah, so there's no good way to poll that. And I don't know that anybody actually has polled that three-way. They certainly would right away. Look, it's not clear yet that he's going to be on the ballot, in which states he'll be on the ballot. It's not clear if he's not on the ballot in every state where he'll campaign, and if he is on the ballot in every state where he'll campaign. So a lot of questions still about him. My sense from a few conversations I had this morning, and it's total guesswork, even by the most experienced political person, is it probably is more of a threat to Kamala Harris than it was to Joe Biden for a variety of demographic reasons and issue reasons. But I don't think we know. But I think it's not the Democrats' biggest problem right now. It's a great question. It's going to be important to watch, but there's no way to say with any specificity. It's very difficult to say even about Biden at this point, who he hurts more. But I do think he's likely to hurt her more than Joe Biden. All right, we're coming to the top of the hour, and I don't want to go longer than an hour. We will reconvene relatively soon, but let's try to get one more in and go ahead with Tyson. Tyson, go ahead.
Mark, great job as all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Out of everything that you've heard, I guess, in the last couple of days, where do you see things if you were a betting man? As they shake
regarding
out?
What?
Oh, shaking out with the Democratic race or the Democratic Party race. Where do you see things shaking out? Do you see the probability of Biden staying on and all the everything that you've kind of heard behind the scenes?
Yeah, I'm not a betting person, but based
okay,
on
if you were though,
based on what my sources have said, I'd say there's probably less than a 20% chance Biden stays on. There's more than a 75% chance Kamala Harris is the nominee. And there's a greater than 65, maybe significantly greater than 65% Trump is elected, depending on how the Democratic nominee shapes up by the fall. Today, I don't think the Democrats are in a position to offer a strong nominee, but they may be by the fall. But today, they're not. Those are my best numbers for you. New York Times describes Joe Biden's event in Madison. In a forceful speech, President Biden insisted that he was staying in the race, calling Donald Trump a liar and a threat to democracy. Right on message. Very grateful to you all for joining. We will reconvene at some point soon. I appreciate those who asked questions. I'm sorry, Jeff, Doug, Steve, and others with their hands up that we didn't get to you. And I look forward to reconvening everybody before too long. Have a good day, good evening, and enjoy your Stephanopoulos interview.